start today with a little message by Parker Palmer. He writes, there was a time when farmers in the Great Plains, out on the Great Plains, the first sign of a blizzard would run a rope from the back door out to the barn. They all knew stories of people who had wandered off and been frozen to death, having lost sight of home in a whiteout while still in their own backyards. Today, we live in a blizzard of a different sort. It swirls around us as economic injustice, ecological ruin, physical and spiritual violence, and their inevitable outcome, war. It swirls within us as fear and frenzy, greed and deceit, indifference to the suffering of others. We all know stories of people who have wandered off into this madness and been separated from their own souls, losing their moral bearings and even their mortal lives. And that ends that reading from Parker Palmer. But today's message is about mindfulness and how it is that we can prevent ourselves from wandering off into those blizzards, how it is that we can erect that rope that leads from the house to the barn so we don't get lost in the snowstorm that we find ourselves in today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about mindfulness in introducing the idea. Some of you are probably very familiar with it, and some of you probably don't know all that much. But I thought I'd read a little bit of what Jim Austin has to say, because I thought he explained it pretty well. He said, mindfulness is a kind of remembering to be here, to be present, to pay attention to this moment of life. When we bring awareness to this moment, we know what we are doing, and we know we are alive. But usually we are not very mindful. Our mind has a mind of its own. And it easily wanders off into some fantasy of the future, some evaluation, judgment, or remembrance of the past. All this time, we sacrifice what is right in front of us, this present moment. And if we do this repeatedly, our minds become a very busy place to live, running back and forth between the past and the future, while our experience of the present moment becomes shallow and unfulfilling. When there is too much thinking going on, it is hard to remain open and accepting of our experience. Even when we think we are being present, we are often so attached to that thinking itself that we mistake the thoughts that we have about the experience for the experience itself. We are often compulsive thinkers, never giving ourselves a rest from the constant inner conversation. As we look more closely at what is going on in our minds, we find that we are often trying to do several things at once, usually thinking ahead to the next thing on the agenda. We live in this world of words, and in addition to our internal chatter, we receive constant stimulation of language in the form of books, advertising, music, and news, and conversation. What we lose is a sense of the direct experience of the richness of life. So the first aspect of mindfulness practice in daily life is just to find ways to remind ourselves to show up in the present moment. At those times when our quality of mindfulness is strong, we tend to have a more spacious mind. By being in a deeper and richer way, we connect directly with that inherent self-worth that is our birthright. Those are his words. And I'll say that for me, and I think probably a lot of you use, that that one of the ways that we do connect to our mindfulness is by going out in nature. How many of you love to go out in nature? Look at the beach, walk in the woods. That's one way that we can restore ourselves. We get off of Facebook, we get off of listening to the news, we get off of all of our sense of things to do, and we find ourselves restored. But mindfulness, because it's a practice, like playing the piano, or becoming an artist, or even learning to be a good lawyer, mindfulness is a practice, and so we have to practice it in order to get good at it. And we have to be intentional about that if we're going to be any good at it. Because if we don't try to have our notice what's going on in our minds and choose to turn off that chatter that is all the regrets about the past or the gloating about the past and all the looking forward, maybe it's making the laundry list that is the things to do. I gotta go shopping and get some vegetables this afternoon or I won't have any, right? We all have that thing. We're sitting here and instead of just being here, we're kind of going ahead to what we're gonna do next. And that we can pay attention to when we're doing that. And we can say to our minds, wait, let's not do that now. Let's just be here. Let's just be here instead. And that is the practice of mindfulness, whether or not you're out in the woods or you're sitting in the sanctuary or you're driving in your car to work or something very mundane, washing dishes at home. Mindfulness is available to you at any time. I thought I'd share a little bit about what Thich Nhat Hanh had to say about how to use mindfulness. He's been practicing for way a lot longer than I have. Our feelings play a very important part in directing all of our thoughts and actions. In us, there is a river of feelings in which every drop of water is a different feeling. Each feeling relies on all of the others for its existence. To observe it, we just sit on the bank of the river and identify each feeling as it surfaces, flows by, and disappears. There are 3 sorts of feelings: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. When we have an unpleasant feeling, we may want to chase it away. But it's more effective to return to our conscious breathing and just observe it, identifying it silently to ourselves. Breathing in, I know there is an unpleasant feeling in me. Breathing out, I know there is an unpleasant feeling in me. Calling a feeling by its name, such as anger, sorrow, joy, or happiness, helps us to identify it clearly and recognize it more deeply. We can use our breathing to be in contact with our feelings and accept them. If our breathing is light and calm, a natural result of conscious breathing, our mind and our body will slow, become light and calm and clear, and our feelings will also. Mindful observation is based on the practice of non-duality. Our feeling is not separate from us or merely caused by something outside of us. Our feeling is us, and for the moment, we are that feeling. We are neither drowned in nor terrorized by the feeling, nor do we reject it. Our attitude of clinging to or rejecting our feelings is the attitude of letting go. It is an important part of meditation practice. If we face our unpleasant feelings with attention, affection, care, nonviolence, we can transform them into a kind of energy that is healthy and has the capacity to nourish us. By the work of mindful observation, our unpleasant feelings can illuminate so much for us, offering us insight and understanding into ourselves and society. So that was Thich Nhat Hanh. Today, since I promised to help you find a way to build that rope, I wanted to share with you a little bit about how mindfulness can help us build that rope for each of us. And I wanted to acknowledge that feelings are running very strong right now, and it's very hard to be in this world with the news and with social media and with our friendships and our relationships and not feel ourselves stirred and our attention and our feelings stirred regularly. So I wanted to remind you about the practice that we've talked about in the past, but maybe not all of you were here, and maybe, at least for me, it's good to have a reminder. What I want to talk to you about is the idea of equanimity. Do you remember equanimity? Some of you may. It is one of the 4 kinds of love which is taught in Buddhism. And what it means is not allowing somebody else's emotional field to get you off from center. And Buddhism teaches that this is one of the ways that we can be loving. Now let's think about that for a minute. Who's raised a toddler? Who's raised a teenager? Do you know that particular way in which who's taught in the middle school? You know that particular way in which kids can get so riled up that you find yourself just somehow ensnared in their emotional field, and they're screaming, and the next thing you know, this perfectly calm, kind, loving, rational human being that you are is shouting back. That is the opposite of equanimity. And what Buddhism teaches us is that equanimity means that we somehow love the world enough that we stop doing that we stop allowing ourselves to get carried off from our own center, our own sense of who we are, our own inner calm, by reacting strongly, whether or not it's happy or sad or mad or confused or whatever. So we have this tendency, to kind of follow someone down that path with them. But the teaching is that we don't need to do that. And indeed, it really will cause a lot less suffering and will be a lot more loving to whoever it is if we don't do that. So I thought about this idea of equanimity when I was reading that children's story. Let me read a couple lines to you again. As a mirror reflects an object, as a still lake reflects the sky, take care that what you speak or act is for good. For goodness will always cast back goodness, and harm will always cast back harm. Because of this, practice mindfulness in all that you do so that your reflection is the one that you intend. This reminds us that in order to be able to pay attention to ourselves, to our speaking and our acting, in order to be that shiny mirror I was talking to the kids about, to be able to see what we are reflecting back into the world, we should practice mindfulness in all that we do. Pay attention. Be aware. Be in the moment. And at these times when it seems that politics and the media and social media and commentary and everyone is trying to get us all riled up, as my mom used to like to call it, riled up. Isn't this horrible? Can't you believe this happened? On and on, day after day. It seems like there's so many invitations to foment and react and become incensed. The world is all in caps and lots of exclamation points right now, isn't it? This, right now, this sermon, this message for today is that you do not have to accept this gift, as the Buddha put it. Just because it's being offered does not mean you need to accept it. And in fact, you may indeed be a much more effective presence in the community if you can minimize your reactions. You can turn away these many gifts that are being piled upon our feet. And so many of you are probably aware that we have just entered the season on Lent, and for many people who grew up with Lent, and I don't know, some of you probably have never had anything to do with Lent because we have a wide crowd out here, but let me ask those of you who think about this, what is the primary Lenten question? So, good UUs always ask questions. So here's, sometimes you think about Lent, you just think about formulaic doings, right? Like giving up something, fish on Fridays, all that kind of stuff. What do we give up, right? But really, Lent begs a question. And that question is, have you figured it out? That question is, how do I prepare for the impending death of God? That's kind of a question, isn't it? Let's translate this a little bit. For a humanist, the question might be, how do I prepare for the impending death of life and love and goodness? Which sort of gets to the feelings we might be feeling right now if we're paying too much attention to the news. For the goddess worshiper, the question might be, how do I prepare for the impending death of my soul or the dark night of my soul? For the Buddhist, the question might be, how do I prepare myself for dukkha, for the inevitable suffering that is? The Lenten question invites us to realize that no matter our overarching mythos, no matter our theology, that suffering, darkness, pain, grief, sorrow, anger, weariness, that whole constellation, these things are very real. Truly something that every human experiences. And this is a lived experience for every human being who is alive. And so then, how do you prepare? I like this little quote from Edith Armstrong. She says, I keep the telephone of my mind open to peace, harmony, health, love, and abundance. And whenever doubt, anxiety, or fear try to call me, they keep getting the busy signal. And soon they forget my number. A little harder with cell phones, but let's try to remember there was a time before cell phones. It's a very good practice in equanimity, this aspiration. This invitation of the season, of the Lenten season, is to try to figure out some tricks that will help you do just that. Set up a busy signal to the craziness that is going on around us. Put out the rope to remind ourselves that we can steady ourselves. We can be calm in this storm. Figure out ways for yourself that you can regularly, honestly practice mindfulness and come into yourselves, back to yourselves, return over and over again, that you may find equanimity in these crazy, wild times that are our lives. And so now let's sing together a song. We're going to sing "The Morning Hangs a Signal." It's number 40 in your hymnal if you're going to read from your hymnal, and the words will be up there on the screen.
Sleeping valley
spoke to you last week about being living prophets, and I hope that this week you go out into the world with a little bit more sense that you actually can do this, that you have the tools within you. And I invite you to use this Lenten season to hone them and prepare them, that you may be good and wise and skillful prophets in the days ahead. Amen.